It happened in the blink of an eye. 1 second, Simone Avery was standing quietly in line at Gate C-17 at Denver International Airport, scrolling through the boarding pass on her phone. The next, 2 uniformed airport security officers were marching toward her, summoned not by an alarm, not by any commotion, but by nothing more than the expression on a gate agent's face. A look of suspicion. A look that didn't match her boarding class. Simone didn't make a sound. She hadn't even spoken a word yet, not to the gate agent, not to anyone. She was simply next in line to board, standing in the first-class priority lane, holding her phone out like every other passenger. But something about her skin tone, her simple attire, her calm demeanor made the agent skip all formalities. No greeting. No smile. No question. Just 4 words, spoken like a verdict: "Ma'am, step aside." The officer's voice was flat, sterile, like he'd done this 100 times before. To him, Simone wasn't a traveler. She was a problem. A disturbance. An anomaly. The murmurs started as soon as the officers approached. People looked up from their phones. A few leaned in. One man tilted his head and whispered something to his wife. The woman gave a disapproving glance, as if Simone had disrupted their tranquil, luxurious travel experience. Simone stood still, her pulse rising but her face blank. She was dressed modestly, no designer brands, no flashy jewelry. A dark gray hoodie zipped halfway over a simple white t-shirt, fitted jeans, and worn black sneakers. Her shoulder bag was canvas, unbranded. She didn't look like someone who regularly flew first class. And in the eyes of gate agent Trevor Maddox, that alone was reason enough for suspicion. Trevor, 29, had worked this gate for just under a year. Polished, clean-cut, and clad in a tailored navy blazer with the Havenport Air logo on the chest, he took pride in maintaining the order and exclusivity of first-class travel. It wasn't written in the airline manual, but he had an instinct he could sense when someone didn't belong. So when Simone stepped forward, calmly extending her phone with a first-class boarding pass, he didn't even look at it. Instead, he tilted his head toward his colleague and muttered just loud enough. "Another upgrade fluke? Happens all the time." Then he waved over security. Simone blinked slowly. Her throat tightened. She looked around, half expecting someone to intervene, to speak up. No one did. One of the officers, tall, white, square-jawed, stopped just 2 feet away from her and asked coldly, "Ma'am, can you come with us, please? We need to verify your credentials." Simone's lips parted, stunned. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice measured. The officer didn't flinch. "Just a routine check. Please step out of line." She looked back at Trevor, who now had his arms folded across his chest, watching with a self-satisfied expression, as though this small disruption confirmed something he'd believed all along. Passengers behind her whispered. One woman tapped her husband's arm and whispered, "This is why they need to be stricter with upgrades." Simone heard every word. Still, she didn't move. Her phone remained raised, the QR code for seat 1A glowing bright on the screen. The officer reached for it, scanning the code. A soft beep. A green checkmark appeared. First class, priority boarding. Valid ticket. There was a pause. The officer looked surprised, almost disappointed. Trevor's smug expression faltered. Simone remained silent, her expression unreadable. She knew she could say more. She could demand to speak to a supervisor, call out the blatant discrimination, or ask why no one else had been pulled aside. But she chose not to. Not yet. Because no one, not the officers, not Trevor, not the snickering passengers behind her, knew who she really was. Simone Avery wasn't just a first-class passenger. She was the executive director of strategic mergers at one of the most powerful investment firms in the country. And right now, she held the deciding vote on a $4.2 billion merger deal, one that could either elevate Havenport Air to new heights or leave it crippled and vulnerable to acquisition. But she wasn't here to flex power. She was here to observe. To see exactly as the board had instructed her how the airline treats people they assume have no power. And so, Simone nodded politely at the officer, took a step back into line, and said nothing. Because this wasn't just a boarding pass. It was a test. And Havenport Air had already started failing it. The boarding process resumed like nothing had happened. The agent behind Trevor called the next passenger, scanning barcodes and smiling as if Simone had simply never existed. Trevor didn't say a word. He just stepped aside, but not before shooting her one last glance, a mix of confusion and resentment that said, "How did you get away with that?" Simone walked down the jet bridge slowly, feeling every eye on her back. Her heart was steady now, her breath controlled, but the sting of the public humiliation lingered like a fresh bruise. She entered the aircraft with quiet grace. The sleek leather seats of first class gleamed under warm lighting. Aromas of citrus-scented towels and fresh-baked bread drifted subtly through the air. But the moment Simone stepped into the cabin, the atmosphere shifted. The head flight attendant, a sharply dressed woman in her late 30s with a polished bob haircut, looked up from her tablet. Her name tag read Candace Ryland. Her eyes met Simone's and, just for a split second, her smile faltered. The cheerful, trained warmth vanished like a glitch in a digital screen. Simone offered a polite nod and moved toward her assigned seat 1A, front left. Candace stepped forward, intercepting her halfway. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, voice flat and businesslike. "We've had a minor delay preparing the first-class cabin. I'll need to ask you to wait a few minutes before taking your seat." Simone blinked. Behind her, other passengers filed in, two men in business suits, a couple in their 50s wearing matching Patagonia jackets, and a young man with designer luggage. They passed Candace with no resistance. They took their seats immediately. No delay. No apology. Simone's eyes scanned the scene, her lips tightening slightly. "Is there an issue with seat 1A?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Candace paused just a fraction of a second too long. "No, not exactly," she replied. "It's about balance. We're still organizing the front cabin for safety reasons. I'll let you know when it's ready." Simone said nothing. She simply stepped aside, standing quietly by the bulkhead wall. She could feel the scrutiny of the other passengers. Whispers. Glances. Curious stares masked as politeness. She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened her notepad app. Entry log, Havenport Air. Time, 8:12 a.m., Mountain Time. Incident, denied seat entry under pretense of cabin balance, while other first-class passengers were allowed to be seated without issue. She tapped save. A minute passed. Then 3. Then 5. Finally, Candace approached again with a rehearsed smile. "You may take your seat now, Miss Avery," Simone said softly. Candace gave a quick nod. "Thank you for your patience." Simone walked to her seat without another word and settled in. The seat was flawless, no issues, no maintenance tags, no signs of delay. Just another excuse. She buckled in and looked out the small oval window. The tarmac below shimmered from the morning sun. Planes taxied across the runways like choreographed machines. But her mind wasn't on the view, it was on the system. This wasn't about one gate agent. It wasn't about one flight attendant. It was a culture. A deeply embedded culture that judged by skin tone and shoe brand rather than identity or intelligence. And she wasn't just here to endure it. She was here to expose it. Candace returned with warm towels and drinks but skipped Simone's row. Twice. On the third pass, Simone raised a finger slightly. "Excuse me," she said, gently. "I haven't received a towel or a beverage." Candace blinked, as if surprised Simone could speak. "Oh, I thought you were waiting for someone." "No. Just flying solo this morning." "I'll get that right away." But the warmth in her voice was synthetic, her smile brittle. Simone took the towel when it arrived cool, not warm, and unfolded it calmly. She dabbed her hands and noted the detail in her notepad. Entry log, Havenport Air. Time, 8:26 a.m. Incident, skipped twice during beverage and towel service. Warm towel replaced with cool, unscented version. Other passengers received lavender-scented, steamed towels. The captain's voice eventually came on, welcoming everyone to their flight to Boston. Simone stared at the back of the seat in front of her, her mind racing. There was no need to escalate yet. No reason to reveal her credentials. Not until they fully showed who they were when they thought she was nobody. She whispered to herself as the cabin doors closed, "You don't know it yet. But you've just given me everything I needed." It had been less than 20 minutes since takeoff, but the pressure in the cabin felt heavier than the aircraft's ascent. Simone sat quietly in her seat, sipping the lukewarm water she'd finally received. The other passengers seemed content, relaxing under plush blankets, reviewing their breakfast menus. Candace Ryland, the head flight attendant, moved elegantly through the cabin, smiling warmly at some, engaging in small talk with others. But every time her eyes landed on Simone, they hesitated. Then came the escalation. Candace returned, this time without a tray. She was holding a tablet, her face serious, too serious for a routine flight. "Miss Avery," she said softly, "may I have a moment?" Simone placed her cup on the tray and met her gaze. "Of course." Candace took a breath, then continued with rehearsed professionalism. "We've just received a notice from ground control regarding weight distribution. Due to adjustments in our load calculations, I'm afraid I have to ask you to relocate to a seat in the economy cabin." The words didn't fully register at first. Simone blinked once, her face unreadable. "To economy?" she asked calmly. Candace nodded, tapping the tablet. "Yes, I know it's inconvenient, but it's a matter of safety protocol." Simone's voice remained measured. "You're moving just one passenger for weight balance?" "We've reviewed all possible arrangements," Candace said. "Your seat is the most suitable for adjustment." "Why wasn't this addressed before boarding?" Simone asked. Candace hesitated. "We were only notified moments ago." Simone took a long, deep breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. But her eyes locked onto Candace with a focus that cut through her composure. "I paid in full for this seat. I boarded with a valid first-class ticket. And you're asking me, only me, to move, while everyone else remains seated?" Candace's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm simply following protocol, Miss Avery." "Protocol doesn't seem to apply evenly, does it?" Silence fell like a curtain between them. Other passengers began to notice. Eyes peeked over magazines. Ears tilted toward the conversation. Simone leaned back slightly, her voice low but firm. "If there's a true safety issue, I'll comply. But I'd like written confirmation of this protocol, as well as the reason I was selected over the other 7 passengers in first class." Candace flinched. "That won't be necessary." "Then neither is moving me." A long beat passed. Candace stared at her, clearly shaken by the calm resistance. She had expected someone to fold, to be embarrassed, to comply without question. But Simone was none of those things. Candace turned and walked briskly toward the galley, her heels echoing down the narrow aisle. Simone remained seated, unmoved, unbothered on the surface, but inside, her resolve burned hotter than ever. This wasn't inconvenience anymore. It was a message. "You don't belong here." Simone opened her notepad app once again. Entry log, Havenport Air. Time, 8:52 a.m. Incident, requested to relocate to economy class under pretext of weight balance, without documentation or prior warning. No other passenger approached with similar request. She placed the phone on her lap and folded her hands. Her silence was no longer just strategy, it was power. Let them dig the hole deeper. Let them reveal their assumptions, their unwritten rules. She had all the evidence she needed. And this was only the beginning. The cabin had settled into a quiet hum again, but Simone could feel the tension tightening around her like a belt cinched one notch too far. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. The resistance hadn't ended, she could feel it gathering in the silence. From the seat directly across the aisle, a voice shattered the calm. "I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous." Simone opened her eyes slowly. The voice belonged to a man in his late 50s, with graying hair combed neatly, a pressed blazer, and a gold wedding ring that caught the light. He was leaning back in seat 1B, arms folded, his eyes trained on Simone with unfiltered disdain. "This isn't a city bus. It's first class," he muttered, louder this time. Simone met his gaze, unblinking. The man wasn't interested in conversation. He was interested in domination. "I've flown Havenport for over 20 years. Never seen this kind of behavior," he continued, waving vaguely toward her. Several heads turned, not in protest, but curiosity, some with raised brows, others with subtle smirks. They were waiting to see what Simone would do. Whether she'd speak. Whether she'd break. But Simone said nothing. That made him angrier. "Honestly," he said, shaking his head, "they're just handing out upgrades to anyone now, huh?" At that moment, Candace returned, moving down the aisle. She approached the man with her usual rehearsed warmth. "Everything okay, Mr. Daniels?" He nodded, then jerked his chin toward Simone. "Just confused. Thought first class meant something." Candace gave a soft, knowing smile. "It still does, sir. Some passengers may have upgraded using miles. Happens occasionally." Then, just loud enough for Simone to hear, she added, "It's unfortunate when others feel uncomfortable because of it." Simone's chest rose slightly as she inhaled, but her face remained composed. She turned her head toward Candace, voice calm, every word intentional. "I didn't use miles. I paid in full." Candace blinked, her smile faltering. Mr. Daniels narrowed his eyes. "Really?" he said, tone thick with disbelief. Simone didn't look at him. She spoke again, to Candace. "And even if I had used miles, does that change the expectation of dignity?" The cabin went still. Candace's professional mask cracked, just for a second. Then she turned abruptly. "If you need anything else, let me know." She walked away briskly. Mr. Daniels scoffed and reached for his magazine. But Simone wasn't done. She turned toward him, her expression still calm, her tone soft but firm enough to cut glass. "Perhaps, Mr. Daniels, the problem isn't who's sitting in first class. It's what you expect people here to look like." He glanced at her, surprised by her poise. "I expect people who've earned it," he said coldly. Simone gave a small nod. "Then you should be glad I'm here." Mr. Daniels opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. He turned away, suddenly interested in the seatbelt sign. Simone leaned back, heart steady. She opened her phone once again. Entry log, Havenport airtime, 9:11 a.m. Incident, passenger in 1B, white male, 50s, made targeted, racially coded comments questioning legitimacy of my presence in first class. Flight attendant Candace Ryland implicitly supported remarks. No intervention. Simone placed the phone on her tray, folded her arms gently. Let them speak. Let them reveal themselves. Because they were no longer just mistreating a passenger. They were unveiling a rot that ran deeper than any single flight. And she was here to burn it down. The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a dull thud. A smooth landing. Seatbelt signs lit up, followed by the captain's standard announcement. Passengers around Simone began shifting, stretching limbs, gathering carry-ons, chatting with renewed energy. The morning flight to Boston had ended. But for Simone Avery, the real turbulence was just beginning. She could feel it before she saw it. Two figures appeared through the window, standing outside the jet bridge door, uniformed airport security officers, their posture straight, eyes scanning through the window. Simone didn't blink. She knew. Her fingers tensed on the armrest. Candace Ryland stood at the galley with a faint smirk curling her lips. She glanced briefly at Simone, then leaned toward the cockpit, whispering something. 30 seconds later, one of the officers boarded the plane. He moved quickly, scanning the rows, and then stopped right at seat 1A. "Miss Simone Avery?" he asked firmly. Simone nodded. "Yes. You'll need to come with us for questioning. We've received a report of disruptive behavior during this flight." Murmurs erupted instantly around the cabin. Mr. Daniels, still seated in 1B, leaned back, folding his arms smugly. "Saw it coming," he muttered under his breath. Simone stood slowly, completely calm. "May I ask who made the report?" The officer didn't answer. He gestured toward the front. "Please come with us." As Simone walked down the aisle, all eyes followed her. She wasn't escorted like a guest. She wasn't treated like a customer. She was paraded like a criminal. Like a threat. Like something that needed to be removed. Candace stood by the door, arms folded, face emotionless. Simone stopped for half a second in front of her. "Quite the performance," she said softly, her eyes piercing. Candace didn't reply. The officer led Simone through the gate and down a restricted hallway, away from the usual baggage claim and crowds. Another officer joined, walking behind her. They brought her into a plain security office, small, sterile, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights. Inside, a table, 2 metal chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. No comfort. No explanation. Just cold suspicion. They asked her to sit. One officer stepped out. The other remained, arms crossed, silent. Simone sat perfectly straight. She didn't flinch. She didn't plead. Because she already knew what this was. She wasn't being questioned. She was being punished for not playing along, for not being intimidated, for refusing to shrink herself. 10 minutes later, the door opened. A new figure entered, tall, white, in his mid-50s, wearing a Havenport Air security badge. His name tag read Gerald Harmon, Director of Passenger Conduct Oversight. "Miss Avery," he said, his tone measured but distant. "I understand there was a situation on board today." "No," Simone said clearly. "There was discrimination. I remained composed the entire flight. I did nothing wrong." Gerald opened a slim file and slid a sheet across the table. "We've received written statements from flight attendant Candace Ryland and passenger Robert Daniels alleging you were confrontational, refused to comply with safety instructions, and made other passengers uncomfortable." Simone leaned forward slowly. "Uncomfortable, because I didn't leave the seat I paid for?" "Because of your tone and behavior," Gerald replied. Simone gave a small laugh, not bitter, just disbelieving. "So I was removed from the plane, interrogated without cause, because I didn't look like I belonged in seat 1A? Because I responded to insults with composure? Because I said no?" Gerald didn't answer. Simone reached into her bag and pulled out a small sealed envelope, white, official-looking, with a blue insignia stamped on the front. She placed it gently on the table. "You may want to open that." Gerald opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. The deeper he read, the more his face changed from confident to confused, then to horrified. It was an official authorization letter from Genesis Capital Holdings, identifying Simone Avery as Senior Executive Vice President and primary decision-maker on the pending $4.2 billion merger with Havenport Air. Gerald looked up, his lips slightly parted. You're the one. I am, Simone said softly. And you're about 10 minutes away from your CEO learning that Havenport Air just tried to detain and humiliate the woman who could sign this airline into history or erase it. The room went dead silent. Simone's voice remained calm, but there was thunder beneath it. You pulled me off the plane like a threat. You believed a biased report without question. You treated me like an intruder. But I wasn't out of place on that plane, Mr. Harmon. I own the pen that decides who gets to fly it. Gerald Harmon sat frozen, the letter still trembling in his hands. Every line of text burned like fire into his sense of control. The weight of what he had just read slowly cracked through his professional demeanor. Across the table, Simone Avery remained composed still, steady, yet her presence now radiated something undeniable: power. The room was dead silent. Then, Gerald's phone buzzed. A shrill, persistent vibration. He fumbled to pull it out of his blazer, his hands slightly slick with sweat. The screen displayed a name that turned his face pale. Leonard Westbrook, CEO, Havenport Air. He answered immediately. Mr. Westbrook, sir, but he didn't get another word in. Leonard's voice roared through the phone like a storm breaking through glass. Gerald, what the hell is going on over there? I didn't know, Gerald stammered. We had no idea who she was. You dragged the executive director of Genesis Capital off a flight? Leonard thundered. Do you have any idea what you've done? They just froze the merger. Froze it, Gerald. That's $4 billion locked in limbo because of your damn incompetence. Gerald's lips trembled. Sir, I was only responding to the incident report filed. Filed by who? Leonard cut in. Some gate agent? A flight attendant? A biased passenger? There was venom in his tone now. We're about to lose a deal that took us 2 years to construct because you couldn't tell the difference between a problem and a damn power broker. The call ended without a goodbye. Gerald looked up at Simone, who sat unmoved. She hadn't said a word during the call. She didn't need to. He stood up, swallowing hard. Miss Avery. I want to extend my deepest. Save it, she interrupted, her voice calm but final. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for answers. And consequences. 10 minutes later, the echo of panic had already begun to ripple through Havenport's corporate headquarters. A Level 1 internal investigation was launched. Urgent summons were dispatched to multiple departments. Screens began lighting up across terminals. Emails flagged as high priority flooded executive inboxes. At JFK International, in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the tarmac, Candace Ryland sat stiffly in a metal chair. Her arms crossed, jaw locked, eyes flickering with the kind of regret that comes too late. Beside her, Trevor Maddox, the gate agent who first flagged Simone at check-in, looked even worse, his dress shirt clinging with sweat, his foot tapping anxiously beneath the table. Across from them, a panel of 5 internal compliance officers had just watched the surveillance replay 3 times in full. The footage was damning. Trevor never scanned Simone's ticket. Candace openly bypassed her for service. Mr. Daniels, who was also summoned, stood red-faced and silent in a corner. One officer leaned forward. Miss Ryland, do you have anything to say for yourself? Candace opened her mouth, but no words came out. The officer turned to Trevor. And you? Trevor swallowed. She just didn't fit the profile. I assumed. You assumed wrong, the lead investigator snapped. And your assumption may cost this airline its most critical merger in a decade. The room fell silent. Until a voice from the doorway broke it. It was Leonard Westbrook himself, CEO of Havenport Air. His presence was like a pressure wave, heavy and suffocating. He walked in slowly, eyes scanning each of them, his voice low but thunderous with fury. "You all judged a woman by her skin, her clothes, her silence. And in doing so, you jeopardized the future of this entire company." He turned to Candace. "You treated her like she didn't belong." Then to Trevor. "You humiliated her before she even spoke." He took a breath, then said what none of them wanted to hear, "Effective immediately, both of you are suspended. Indefinitely. And subject to full disciplinary review." Candace broke down. Trevor didn't even argue. Leonard paused, then added, "And Mr. Daniels, we will be formally banning you from flying with Havenport Air again. This is not a private club. This is an airline. And if you can't treat every passenger with dignity, then you're not welcome on our planes." The room remained silent as Leonard turned and walked out. Across the country, Simone Avery stood at the edge of Gate C-32, watching the clouds drift slowly above the Boston skyline. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't triumphant. She was focused. The fire had already started. And now, it would burn through everything that allowed this to happen. 3 days after the flight that shook Havenport Air to its core, Simone Avery walked through the towering glass doors of Genesis Capital Holdings. The lobby, an expanse of marble and brushed steel, buzzed with quiet urgency. Her heels clicked across the floor, measured, calm, unapologetic. Everyone turned to look. Not because she was loud, or commanding attention. Because they knew. She had just become the most powerful person in the room. She stepped into the executive elevator. The doors closed. A soft chime echoed as the numbers climbed, 38, 39, 40. The top floor. She entered the boardroom without knocking. Already waiting were 11 board members, the top brass of Genesis. At the head of the table sat Elliot Stroud, the founder and chairman. A man known for calm detachment. But even he looked rattled as Simone walked in, carrying a sleek leather folder. She placed it on the table and sat down. "Miss Avery," Elliot began, clearing his throat. "We've received the preliminary investigation results from your team regarding Havenport Air. I imagine you've also seen the surveillance footage," Simone replied, voice crisp. He nodded once. She opened the folder and slid several documents forward. "What you've seen is not just an unfortunate incident. It's a pattern. One that reflects a systemic rot buried deep inside that company's operations. And not just theirs. The entire sector is infected." Another board member, Cynthia Hartley, leaned forward. "And you're recommending we freeze the merger entirely?" Simone didn't blink. "No. I'm recommending we invoke Clause 14B of the Strategic Ethics Mandate." There was a pause in the room. That clause hadn't been used in years. Elliot's brow furrowed. That would require a complete audit of Havenport's leadership, mandatory diversity reform, and a public apology campaign. Simone nodded. "Yes. Along with a 12-month oversight period where Genesis reserves veto power over any executive hire or policy change. If they want our signature, they play by our terms. Publicly. And if they refuse?" Cynthia asked. "Then we let them collapse," Simone said. "And we buy the wreckage for half the price." Silence settled over the room, cold and absolute. Simone leaned back. "This wasn't just about me. This is about every customer who's ever been judged unworthy of dignity because of their skin, their silence, or their appearance. If we sign that deal as is, we endorse it. We become complicit." Elliot looked around the table. No one objected. Then he nodded once. "Unanimous." Simone stood up, gathered her folder, and turned toward the window. Boston's skyline stretched beyond the glass, sharp, modern, unforgiving. She didn't feel victorious. She felt resolute. This wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. And Havenport Air had just learned what it meant to ignore that responsibility. 2 weeks later, Simone Avery walked through Logan International Airport under a soft overcast sky. There were no cameras. No boardrooms. No billion-dollar decisions to sign. Just silence. She moved with quiet purpose, carrying a single black leather handbag, dressed in a slate gray coat and simple flats. For the first time since that flight, she felt light. Not because the battle had been won, but because the weight of pretending she wasn't carrying power had been lifted. Up ahead, she saw her gate. Gate B14. And then she saw her. Candace Ryland, standing near the crew kiosk, now dressed in a standard domestic flight uniform, no gold-trimmed stripes, no badge of seniority. Her posture had changed. Shoulders hunched slightly. Eyes lower. As Simone approached, Candace looked up. Their eyes locked. She froze. Simone didn't flinch. She kept walking until she was right in front of her. Candace straightened reflexively, almost out of old habit. "Miss Avery," she began, voice cracking slightly. "I didn't expect." Simone raised a hand gently, signaling silence. Not in cruelty. In control. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Simone said softly, "You're still working." Candace nodded slowly. "Domestic routes only. Mandatory recertification. Performance reviews every month." Simone looked her up and down, not judgmentally but with a gaze that saw everything. The broken pride. The muted regret. The weight of consequences that could no longer be brushed aside. "Do you remember what you said to me on that flight?" Simone asked. Candace swallowed hard. "Yes. You said you thought I got the seat with Miles. You said it was unfortunate when people feel uncomfortable." Candace's eyes glistened. "I was wrong." "You weren't just wrong," Simone replied, her voice low. "You were comfortable being wrong." That made Candace blink. Simone took a step closer. "You were more worried about protecting the illusion of class than acknowledging humanity. You didn't just ignore me. You erased me." Candace nodded, shame flooding her face. "I wasn't trying to be cruel." Simone tilted her head, calm but sharp. "But you were willing to be. And that's what makes it dangerous." The silence between them grew heavy, but not hostile. Just real. Candace looked down. "They're making us attend mandatory bias training now. Everyone. Even flight operations. I suppose that's something." "It is," Simone said. "But it shouldn't have taken a scandal." "I know." Simone stood still for a moment longer, then reached into her bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. Candace accepted it, her fingers trembling. It was a copy of Genesis Capital's public statement, the one that had gone viral. At the bottom, highlighted in yellow, was a quote from Simone: "Dignity should never depend on perception. It should be policy." Candace looked up. Simone's eyes were steady. "You don't need to apologize. Just don't forget." Then she turned and walked away. Not as someone who had just punished, but as someone who had just taught. In the months that followed, Havenport Air became unrecognizable. A company once known for its prestige now became a case study in public reckoning. The story of Simone Avery spread across news outlets, business journals, and boardrooms across the country. It wasn't just about discrimination anymore. It was about the illusion of class. It was about how power dressed itself in silence, and how arrogance unraveled under the weight of its own ignorance. Genesis Capital's reform conditions were implemented in full. Havenport's executive board was restructured. Mandatory anti-bias training became quarterly. First-class service policies were rewritten from the ground up with new language, new expectations, and a zero-tolerance clause that would have once been laughed off. And yet Simone Avery said very little. She didn't attend press tours. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't post hashtags or victory speeches. Because for her, the victory was never about visibility. It was about integrity. She continued her work at Genesis, quieter than ever, but now, when she entered a room, people didn't just see a brilliant strategist. They saw a symbol. A symbol of what happens when dignity stands its ground. Of what happens when the world expects you to shrink, and you decide to stand tall instead. Airlines across the country began reviewing their own protocols. Diversity councils were formed. Secret shoppers were hired. And the phrase, Avery Standard, slowly emerged as an industry term, an informal way to say, this is how passengers should be treated, no matter who they are. Simone didn't ask for that legacy. But she accepted it. And one morning, as she boarded another quiet flight, simple coat, no makeup, carry-on in hand, an attendant greeted her with a genuine smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Avery. Thank you for flying with us." Simone paused for a second. Then smiled gently. And for the first time in a long while, she replied, "Thank you. It's good to be seen."